and with the measure you use it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye when there's the log in your own eye? You have to recognize you will be judged. You will be judged. One day, you are going to be before the Father, and you are going to have to look, he's going to look at you and say, are you going to be with him for eternity, or is it going to be eternal separation? Here's the thing. We are all broken and messy. We all sin all the time. I'm sure most of us, if not all of us in this room, have done that today. But if you are following Jesus, if you have faith, if you are committing your life to him, that day when judgment happens, God looks at you and he doesn't see that messiness, he doesn't see that brokenness, he sees his son and what he's done for you. But you have to recognize you deserve that judgment. You don't deserve to be with him for eternity. So when you are thinking about what it looks like to judge other people, remember the judgment that you deserve that you've been freed from. And here's my advice for you in the midst of that. When you think about what that judgment looks like, act accordingly. Recognize the undeserved grace that you have. The fact that you are going to be judged too. You should be judged. And this illustration that it talks about is all about perspective. So when you call out the speck in your brother's eye, but you don't recognize the log in your own, it's not like you have this big stick that's coming out of your eye. That's not what Jesus is saying. What he's saying is you have the same speck that's in your own eye, and it should be so big because it's in your own eye that you're neglecting the same thing in your eye and so focused on somebody else's. You have to handle that speck in your eye before you can say anything about anybody else's. Pretty much what this means is that you're going to have to handle your own crap before you point out somebody else's. That's what this is. You have to handle what you have done, and it's all about attitude. What is your attitude like when you're approaching somebody? Are you sitting in a humble place remembering the judgment that you deserved? Or are you coming from this place of saying hey, I still have the speck in my eye, but I see all of the things that you were doing wrong and not following Jesus, and I want to point every single one out. I don't care about myself. I want to point yours out. That's an attitude of passing judgment. That's not an attitude of helping somebody see their flaws. See, we're called to not cast judgment upon others until we have recognized the judgment that we deserve. And only then we are to lovingly cast judgment on people. Cast some judgment on people. Judgment is not a bad thing always. I know I've just been talking about how you shouldn't, you have to be careful how you do this, but this passage never says not to judge people. What it does say is at the end of it, it goes in and says, you hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. When you handle your own problems, when you recognize your own sinfulness, the things that you are broken in, and you correct your attitude as you approach somebody, it is then and only then that you can go and help people. That you can go and talk to people. I think the word clearly here is used on purpose. At this point, you have recognized the grace you have received, and then you can go up to this person and say, hey, is this actually worth bringing up? There are certain things that you might want to point out because it's your preference, that it's your frustration with them. Let's talk about the tattoos thing, right? Some people really think if you have tattoos, you are not welcome in church, God's not going to love you, whatever it is. That's not true. You are welcome here. We love the fact that you're here. I don't have tattoos, but almost all of our pastors have tattoos. It is not a sinful thing. And so if you have taken that speck out of your own eye and recognized that this isn't a bad thing, when you look at somebody, you can say, maybe this isn't worth calling out. If somebody has a beer every once in a while or a drink or something like that, and they're not getting drunk, it's just something they're doing socially, take the speck out of your own eye. Recognize, there's nothing in Scripture that says you can't have one drink. That we have to go to these things with the attitude and understanding that once we remove that, we have a better, more clear picture of what it looks like to actually observe and to see those people and see, do they actually need help? How many of you guys know the story of David and Bathsheba? Anybody? Just by show of hands, yeah? So, okay, cool. If you don't know the story of David and Bathsheba, it talks about, it takes place in David was king. Sorry, yeah, David was king. Lots of D names in the Old Testament. I can't keep them straight, kind of thing. He was king, and throughout this time, he was called this man of God, and he was like uplifted and pointed to as this person that was very holy. But he really was just a man. He was just human. Because he had wives and he had a lot of money and he had a lot of blessings, but one day he looked down and he saw this woman, this beautiful woman, and he said, I want her. And he went and he slept with her, only to find out that she was married. And so he sent somebody to have her husband killed so that he didn't get found out. And so in 2 Samuel 12, Nathan, somebody who was close to him, approached him, and it says this in the passage. And the Lord sent Nathan to David. He came to him and said to him, there were two men in a certain city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. And he brought it up, and he grew with him and with his children. They used to eat of his morsel and drink from his cup and lie in his arms, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and he was unwilling to take one of his own flock or herd to prepare for the guest who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. Then David's anger was greatly kindled against the man. And he said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die, and he shall restore the lamb fourfold because he did this thing and because he had no pity. Nathan said to David, you are the man. Like, can you imagine? He gives him this whole illustration that there's these different things. He's talking about these lambs, and David clearly sees the problem. And Nathan looks at him and says, I'm talking about you, about what you did. He brings it before him with this story of grace and with truth. He helps him to recognize the problem. He helps him to see that this is sin, what you've done, that you've betrayed the Lord. He didn't just come up to him and say, you're a sinner, I can't believe you did murder, I'm calling the cops kind of thing. He came up to him and said, look what you've done. You even said this person deserves death. And it's an approach of saying, instead of just pointing out and walking away, it's saying, you need to see that this is an issue. And so judgment isn't always a bad thing, but the question becomes, what does it look like to judge well? And there's three questions I want you to ask yourself. When you're approaching a situation, when you're thinking about somebody, ask these things of yourself first. And the first thing, ask yourself, do you judge others too much? How often do you call people out? Do you find yourself talking about others behind their back frequently? And if you do, is it judgmental or just mean? Are there things that you want to bring up and tell people, or you're particularly frustrated? Are they actually worth bringing up, or are they just kind of your personal preference? In the modern context of social media, we are prone to point out other people's flaws with a keyboard. We want to go and we want to build ourselves up and make ourselves feel good when we point out the issues and things that are wrong, and we're keyboard warriors because then we could just turn our phone off and go back to whatever we were watching on Netflix. And in this particularly turbulent political climate, man, as time goes on, as election day gets closer and closer, things are starting to ramp up. Anger and frustration is at an all-time high. And it is much easier for us to go up to somebody or to go on social media and comment how much they're a bigot and how much they can't stand these people and how much their person is better and this thing, and they're just going back and forth. And all they want to do is point out people. And the thing is, they're in the church still together. They come together on Sunday mornings. Is this really worth it? Is this really helpful right now? Ask yourself, do you see a bigger problem, or is it just preference? And when you see that bigger problem, how are you approaching it? But my next question that you should be asking yourself is, do you judge others enough? This one's interesting, but are you calling people out? I think when we're younger, when we're young adults, it's much easier to let things slide, let the world kind of influence where we're at and what we desire and what we think is right. Let social media fill those things. Let the algorithm fill what we think, what they want us to understand is right, kind of thing. And as we go into it, we are more nervous about offending and maybe losing friendships than it is helping to build one another up. Are you calling people out in their sin? And I'm not saying, like, it's not the former half where you're just pointing things out, but are you coming alongside them and saying, hey, I think this is a problem. I think you have a drinking problem. I think you have a pride problem. I think you have a gossip problem. I think you have a porn problem. I need you. I want to help you do this. How can we work together to push through these things? Don't let your brother or sister dawdle in sin just because you're nervous how they might react. Approach them, talk to them about it, help them recognize it, and go alongside them to help them to glorify God. But lastly, the thing I want you to ask yourself every single time is, do you recognize the judgment you deserved and the grace you received? That couple that moved into that house, they had that window that looked out at their neighbor. The wife came down for breakfast one morning, and the husband had made it, kind of thing, had it all ready. And she looked out and she saw the neighbor putting out like the clothes and stuff like that, and it was all clean. And she said, wow, like maybe she recognized it, maybe something happened. And the husband sat down at the table and looked at her and says, actually, this morning I took a rag and I just wiped the window down. That was on us, kind of thing. Are you actually looking at things clearly? Have you done the due diligence to remember what you are given, the grace that you don't deserve? Or are you okay with just sitting there with the dirty window and looking out? Look at the fact that you need Christ more than ever, and to help other people see Christ. Band, if you guys want to come up. Remember, the grace that you were given is undeserved. You don't deserve that because of your sin. But God looks at you. He loves you. He cares about you. He desires for you to draw closer to him. He does not desire you to have that speck in your eye. Come alongside one another. Recognize those problems and say, how can I help you with this? How can I help you to see that you need growth? That I want you to draw closer to God with everything that you do, with everything that you have. Remember, judging is not a bad thing. But it's all about attitude. Is your attitude more like that fruit inspector? Or is it more like Christ and how he looks at you and says, I desire better for you? Bow your heads with me. Lord, I thank you for the people in this room. I thank you that you gave us your Son who revealed to us what it looks like to truly and better follow you. Help us to recognize when we have a judgmental spirit, when our spirit is not helpful, when it's one that just is angry and frustrated and doesn't desire the best for people, but that ultimately it's more reflective of you and who you are. And ultimately, Lord, help us to see how we can love one another better and care for one another better, and we can ultimately remember what your Son has done for us on the cross. I thank you for that. In your name I pray. Amen.